Winter in the Middle Ages was not a season to enjoy. It was a threat. For peasants trapped in wooden huts, a blizzard could mean death in a matter of hours. There were no central stoves, no insulated walls, and no backup supplies when the storm hit. Families listened to the wind tearing at their roofs, wondering if the next gust would rip everything away. Survival was never guaranteed. What tricks did they use to endure nights when the cold alone could kill? Peasants feared winter more than war. Battles ended quickly, but cold dragged on for months. Historical records show that the early 1300s brought the Great Famine, triggered by relentless cold and rain. Between 1315 and 1317, entire harvests failed, hay rotted, and animals starved. Hungry families faced not just freezing nights, but empty storage bins. For many villages, one strong blizzard could erase weeks of hard work and push them closer to death. Winter was not a season, it was a curse. Peasants had no stone castles. Their best defense was digging into the earth. Many huts were half buried, with walls made of straw and clay packed together to trap heat. A doorway hung with animal hides blocked icy wind from rushing inside. These shelters looked miserable, more like holes than homes, yet they stood when lighter shacks collapsed. Living underground was dirty and cramped, but it meant the family could still wake up alive the next morning. Inside those huts, the air was choked with smoke. There were no proper chimneys, only a crude hole in the roof, where fumes escaped slowly. Walls blackened with soot, children coughed, and eyes burned, but smoke kept warmth from leaving too fast. The central fire burned small to save fuel, and the room stayed dim and suffocating. To modern people it would feel unbearable, but to peasants it was the thin line between shivering in the open and surviving until dawn. One of the strangest survival tactics was sharing space with animals. Cows, goats, and sheep were brought inside to keep them alive, but they also gave off body heat. Families lay under furs, while livestock stood only a few feet away. The warmth was faint, yet sometimes the difference between frostbite and survival. Children fell asleep to the sound of animals shifting beside them. The smell was awful, the noise constant, but no one questioned it when the blizzard screamed outside. Fuel was another nightmare. Forests near villages were quickly stripped of firewood, and peasants often had no access to good logs. Instead, they burned peat dug from swamps, bundles of dry straw, and even dried animal dung. These fires gave weak heat and thick smoke, making the hut both choking and freezing at the same time. If fuel ran out during a blizzard, families had no choice but to sit in the dark, wrapped in hides, waiting for the storm to end. Clothing was just as basic. Wealthy people wore layered wool and fur, but peasants had to settle for coarse wool cloaks and patched tunics. Boots were rare. Many wrapped rags around their feet and stuffed them with straw. Snow soaked through quickly, leaving feet numb and raw. There were no waterproof coats, no gloves, only crude mittens if they were lucky. Every step outside during a storm risked frostbite. Survival often meant simply not leaving the hut for days at a time. When caught in a storm far from home, peasants built temporary shelters on the spot. They dug shallow pits in the snow, covered them with branches, and crawled inside to block the wind. Others leaned rough boards or haystacks against each other to form a small cave. These makeshift refuges were barely enough, but during deadly blizzards, they could mean the difference between crawling home alive or freezing stiff in the open field. Food in winter was limited to whatever had been saved in autumn. Root vegetables like turnips and cabbages, sour rye bread, and fermented foods kept people alive. But when supplies ran low, meals shrank to thin gruel or nothing at all. Hunger and cold combined into a deadly duo, draining strength fast. Chronicles mention entire families collapsing after days of eating almost nothing. Without food, even the warmest fire could not keep the body alive for long. Blizzards did not just threaten homes. They destroyed entire villages. Roofs collapsed under heavy snow, fences broke, and barns caved in, killing animals inside. Families who lost their huts sometimes crowded into a neighbor's smoky shelter. doubling or tripling the number of people in one room. The smell, noise, and heat were suffocating, but leaving meant certain death in the storm. Cooperation was not a choice, it was survival. Peasants relied on each other because no one could survive winter storms alone. Villages shared food when one family's supplies ran out and helped rebuild when roofs collapsed. Sometimes, several families crowded into a single hut, huddling together like cattle. It was loud and uncomfortable, but pooling resources increased the odds of survival. If one person had peat, another had turnips, and someone else had wool, together they stood a chance. Alone, they froze or starved within days. Religion was also part of winter survival. Many peasants believed storms were punishments from God and prayed for protection. Priests led processions through snow-covered streets, blessing huts and barns. Some burned candles before crude icons, asking saints to spare their children from frostbite. Faith did not change the weather, but it gave people hope when nature felt merciless. Without prayer, many believed their homes would collapse or their harvests fail. Hope was as necessary as bread. Despite prayers, the winters often killed in silence. Chronicles describe entire families found frozen inside huts, still huddled together. In some years, burial grounds could not be dug because the ground was frozen solid. Bodies were left above ground, covered in snow until spring. Such images haunted survivors and became grim reminders of what awaited if firewood ran out or food was gone. Winter did not forgive weakness. Children suffered the most. They had the weakest clothing and needed more food to grow. In harsh winters, many never saw spring. Survivors later recalled huddling under coarse blankets, listening to the wind roar while their stomachs ached from hunger. For parents, the greatest fear was waking up to find a child cold and still beside them. Every night was a gamble between life and death inside the hut. When storms tore apart roofs and no shelter remained, peasants sometimes dug into snow itself. Snow caves, though freezing, blocked wind better than open air. Families crouched inside, wrapped in hides, waiting for the storm to pass. It was desperate and dangerous, but so was every choice in medieval winter. Some survived these makeshift dens, others never crawled back out. Survival was not skill alone, it was also luck. Storms often lasted for days. Without sunlight, huts turned into prisons filled with smoke, stench, and fear. People lost track of time and sat in silence, too weak to talk. Snow piled higher against the walls until doors could not open. Sometimes, families dug tunnels out just to breathe. When storms finally ended, they emerged, blinking into a world buried in white, their fields destroyed and animals dead. Survival was temporary, because another blizzard could strike any day. Animals that survived inside huts were both a blessing and a curse. They gave milk and heat, but disease spread quickly in the cramped space. Fleas and lice thrived in winter, biting people through their furs. Sometimes animals panicked during storms, knocking over fires or crushing children in the dark. Peasants accepted the danger because losing cattle meant losing life itself. To them, animals were not just property, they were breathing heaters and the difference between hunger and survival. When food ran out completely, desperate choices followed. Some boiled leather straps to make weak broth. Others ate bark or ground acorns, which caused sickness. In the harshest famines, people turned to carrion or even dug up frozen animals from the snow. These were not stories of laziness, but of despair. The line between survival and death was razor thin, and winter forced people to cross it again and again. Modern historians call this period the Little Ice Age, a time when Europe faced colder, harsher winters than usual. Tree rings and chronicles confirm how sudden climate shifts devastated crops and lives. For peasants, it felt like nature itself had turned against them. They had no choice but to bend, adapt, and pray. Every winter tested their strength and their desperation, and only those who combined both lived to see spring. In the end, medieval peasants survived deadly blizzards, not with comfort, but with stubbornness, crude shelters, shared warmth, and endless suffering. Their lives were brutal and fragile, constantly balanced between hunger, cold, and disease. Yet they endured, not because winter was kind, but because giving up meant death. Next time you feel a chill in your heated house, remember that centuries ago, survival meant shivering in the dark, with only smoke, animals, and hope to keep you alive.